Now it's for our afternoon panel. And again, young people proving they're one step, if not 5 steps ahead of us on the stage already. Just waiting for those with accumulated youth. I'm going to adopt that phrase now from the High Commissioner to take a seat. All right. As we've been talking about, now we're going to look to the future. And we're going to hear from a younger generation with fresh voices and a fresh perspective on some of the human rights challenges facing Australia. How we might have all been getting it all wrong for a long time, or what we might need to be doing better, or where we should be prioritising from now on. Artist and advocate Emily Dash is going to moderate it. Welcome, Emily. And joining her on the stage, founder of Titus for Titus, Marlee Silva. Titus for Titus is an initiative which is designed to empower young Indigenous women to know their worth and to know what they're capable of. Then spokesperson for the Schools Strike for Climate Action Group, Aisheeya Huq. Now you would have seen her face in recent times, bringing things to the streets and making those with accumulated youth sit up and hopefully not be triggered as they were by Greta Thunberg. We also have CEO of Keep Talking NT, Frank Hooper. Keep Talking is focused on developing educational tools about the LGBTQIA+ community. Please welcome all of them here.
Thank you. My name's Emily Dash. I'm an artist and advocate. And before I begin, I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Pay my respects to Aboriginal elders and any Aboriginal people here today. But I want to welcome you to our panel discussion, which, as you've just heard, is called Looking to the Future. And I picked up on what the High Commissioner said this morning about youth being a passion for things. It's about believing in causes and doing something about the things we believe in. And that was something that I also found in a quote from renowned anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said that the young must ask the questions that we as adults would never think to ask. And I think that's where I want to start the discussion today. And in doing so, I might throw to the panellists. So my first question, and I'll start with Frank, is what questions have you been asking lately?
It's a very, very good question. So I guess through my work with Keep Talking, I've been asking a few questions, and more specifically at the moment been looking at where the LGBT community and the mental health community intersect, and in a way that is very important right now with the discussions around the Religious Freedoms Bill as well. And so a question that I've been asking myself recently, and I would like everybody to sort of think about, is how is Australia as a country going to commit to what the government has stated as their goal to reduce mental illness and mental difficulty in young people by 50%. How are we going to stick to that goal without acknowledging and listening to young people and people in minority groups?
Very good question. Aisheeya.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about kind of like my background, because a lot of people, I feel like, maybe might be curious, like, where did this 16-year-old girl find her space in the activism kind of sector? And it actually did start on a very grassroots level, and not as an activist kind of endeavour. So one day, Parramatta, so that's Western Sydney, Parramatta, 36-degree day, it was 2017, so I'm in year 9, and I decided to go with my friend on a Paint the Town AYCC held event. So Paint the Town's like you do some chalking, you hang up some posters, talk to people that pass by, and I hadn't really heard about Adani up until that point, but clearly now I do. So yeah, billionaire coal guy, not good. Our government doesn't think so, but that's another discussion. And so I did some chalking, I talked with some people, and I made it my obligation after realizing the urgency of the climate situation that we're in, made it my obligation to engage and in like this organization called Australian Youth Climate Coalition, learn about the science, do my part, and then this whole movement came about in late 2018. So that was November 30th, the first strike. That held about 20,000 people around Australia. So that's 20,000 students that mobilised, came together. That was really monumental for us because that was our first action and it was really big for the time. Then March 15, we have 100,000 Australians go on strike for this movement. And then just recently, September 30th, 330,000. So the question I'm asking is why doesn't our government, why don't we have a proper solution? Why don't we have an actual climate policy, as other panelists had brought up beforehand? We don't have any any legislative approach to this. Why? It just doesn't make sense. You're clearly in this democratic society, your constituents want that, we've expressed that, young people want that, and for some reason the response hasn't been sound.
Only a few questions there then. Marlee.
Well, first I'll say Yama Marlee Nagaya Yina Gamilaroi Dangari. I'm a proud Gamilaroi Dangari woman, and as an Aboriginal woman, I want to also extend my respects to the Gadigal people whose land that we're on. The first question that actually comes to mind is, what was I doing at 16 and 19? Not that. I'm truly honoured to be on this panel. I think that through the work that I'm doing now with Titters for Titters, which kind of happened by accident, I was looking to extend the momentum we saw in the 2018 NAIDOC theme of Because of Her We Can by having a space where Aboriginal women and girls could really be shamelessly brilliant and wear their Black excellence with pride. And I started on social media, and now we have almost 20,000 followers, a podcast and an upcoming book deal, all within less than 12 months, which is pretty insane. So that was the first question I was asking with Titters for Titters is how do we create that space? And now I've created it. The next question is, how do I use my platform to bring along the other 97% of the population who aren't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, but need to walk with us for us to build a brighter and better future for all of Australia? We are far too overrepresented in all the worst kinds of ways and underrepresented where we should be louder and prouder. Again, not small questions, are they? But that's where I'm at as it stands.
Don't worry, Marlee, I think you've well and truly earned your place on the panel. I think my next question, it's all about questions today, stems from this idea that human rights is a huge conversation. As we've seen today, we've spent the day talking about it. And I think up until recently, it's been framed as, quite an adult conversation. I want to know, and again, I'll start from this end of the panel, how important do you guys think it is that young people have a voice in terms of human rights issues?
I think it's incredibly important. Young people, as it's been said about 1 million times, are the future leaders of this country and of the world. And in order for us to be able to lead in a way that makes you all proud, that makes us proud, and that makes our children and our children's children proud, is that we need to be involved in the discussions as they're happening, and we need to be involved in what we're passionate about. And if that's human rights, I think that it's something that no matter what age you are, you should be allowed to participate in, which is actually a human right, is the right to participate. I think that no discussion is too difficult to have if you can phrase it in the right way. And I think that coming from an area where we weren't encouraged to ask why we weren't allowed to do something, we weren't encouraged to ask why that was or wasn't one of our rights. I wish I knew my rights earlier, and I wish that it was a discussion that people felt freer to have with young people around the world. I think that leaving it to just the adults means that once young people become adults, we tend to fall into the sort of attitude of, oh, we don't really care about this because we've never cared about it before, why should we start caring about it now? If you bring in this discussion with young people when they care about it, then there's just going to be a carry-on, and there's going to be, I guess, just an excitement and a passion to fight for what you're entitled to have as a human being.
Yeah. And that energy is something that we really need right now, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's all good and well to encourage young people to take part in conversations and to speak up about their, what they're passionate about. But at some point that becomes tokenistic. And we were talking about this, how we don't want this to be a young people's panel where you listen to young people and you congratulate them for the things they're doing at such young ages, but rather an activist panel. And, you're seeing people, I mentioned the numbers, but that's just one aspect of this entire movement. You'll see young people take part and, practice their democratic right to protest. You're seeing them protesting for human rights, for their right to a safe climate, to a sustainable future. So rather it's helping that, it's encouraging the systems we have in place, whether it be in regard to the education system, just our politicians in place, etc., making sure that they encourage this kind of behaviour and support us, because my personal experiences, so just to provide one anecdotal experience, this was before I was going to be on the project, and my school, for some reason, very triggered by any sort of media appearance that we do, especially if it's leftist of any sort, right? So my principal calls me into her office. First I tell my deputy, she takes me to my principal's office, and then my principal tells me, and I can quote her on this, "You're a silly girl. You don't know what you're doing. You're being used as militants by adults who have an agenda." And it went on, but those words stuck in my head. So that definitely deteriorated my mental state of well-being and eventually lessened my involvement in School Strike for Climate, which is really upsetting. But that and a series of other unfortunate events and interactions with the hierarchy at my school, which was encouraged by the I don't know what his position is, but the district something, who is, his boss is the state something, and then his boss is, so like, there's a process, right? It comes down that kind of line of hierarchy, and it falls on me, and falls on students who want to make a change, who want to, demand their right to a safe climate, their right to a sustainable future, but can't because they're not encouraged to do so and are put down.
So this panel is called Looking to the Future, but I would argue it should be called Looking at the Future. The people who are up here with me are doing the work, and I think that, we discussed kind of not being really comfortable with being looked at as like the young panel, the young kids who are, fighting their way through. Because that devalues our power. What just the three of us have done in our ability to mobilise people is something that plenty of adults can't do. I say an adult, like I'm not an adult, I'm 24, I'm definitely an adult. But much older people don't have the ability to do, and I think it is completely irresponsible to not have us at the table, but actually allow us to have power in making decisions. You know, you see the kids who did the climate strike, and then, you know, plenty of older people joined them in this time round, but you guys, you can't even vote yet. You're not old enough to vote. So we do need the older generations to back us when we're doing those sorts of things. And, you know, as an Aboriginal woman, I actually represent the biggest age demographic for our people, because we're such a young population. That's the difference between us and non-Indigenous Australia. Non-Indigenous Australia is an ageing population. Aboriginal Australia is very, very young. So our young people are actually our leaders as well, and as we're emerging, we need some of the older people to step aside and let go of some of that power. We're promised that we're not trying to make life less great for you, we're just aware of the fact that these issues are going to impact us more.
I think that leads quite well into my next question. And it's this, that we hear quite a lot in mainstream media and general society, again, up until recently, I suppose, about how young people are becoming increasingly disengaged from politics. And I wanted to chat to you about sort of what the real challenges are for young people who want to mobilise, and really what can be done about that. And I might start with Aisheeya, because you sort of touched on it a bit earlier.
So there might be some questions surrounding why do we partake, why do we want to mobilise? And well, if you're going to be, I'm going to do a little exercise here. If you're going to be in a decade's time, in your 20s, can you please raise your hand? So that's 3 people, or 4
people?
4 people. Yeah, so that's a reflection of, sorry, I'm taking this in my own direction, but that's a reflection of kind of where these events that are in place to receive like feedback on where our human rights are and where we should be going. It's a reflection of the audience that we have and the people that we have giving that advice. So I see an imbalance there, and I think you all do as well. And yeah, what was the original question? Sorry.
The question is more around what the real challenges are for young people who want to engage, and sort of what can be done to address those. So basically, what are the barriers that young people face?
Well, okay, so that kind of connects. One barrier is that young people aren't invited into these conversations, and they're not here physically. You can see they're not here. There's 4 out of a lot of people here who are young, by definition. And the reason why I said 10 years was that the UN, the IPCC report stated that from this point on, in 10 years' time, we'll be passing this, the point of irreversible damage, right? So that's when we pass the tipping point, there's no going back, yada, yada, you get the theme. So that means that you won't be experiencing, the majority of the people in this room won't be experiencing the consequences. And you want to listen. I know you want to listen to young people and you want to intake what we have to say, but I'm not the sole person making up School Strike for Climate. There are so many people in this movement, and they're not here today to relay that information to you. So that's one barrier to fulfilling our demands, our obligations, as I called it, to ensuring that we have a sustainable future. Yeah.
Frank.
Yeah. Something I talk about a lot is participation, and not necessarily just having young people in the room, but actually actively listening to young people and just taking on what they said seriously, not as, oh, this is amazing that a young person is thinking about this, but more what this person is saying, regardless of their age, is important and is something we need to act on. I've experienced many times in my work over the last couple of years, being invited into spaces as a representative of the young community for, like I was part of Youth Justice Reinvestment in the Northern Territory, and I was invited to one of the meetings, and I was the only young person there. I was the only person under the age of 30 at that meeting, and I was permitted to speak for 1 minute and then not listened to for the rest of the meeting at a Young Justice Reinvestment meeting. So I think inviting people into these spaces is all well and good, but once these people are there, you need to actually listen and take on what they're saying in a serious manner that doesn't dismiss what they're presenting and the information they're having, because we are all experts in the experiences that we hold, and just because we are younger does not mean that we don't know what we're talking about.
Is it something then also around young people being invited to leadership positions?
I think so, yes. I think bringing young people into leadership positions can be a very valuable thing for an organisation or for a group. Definitely, yeah.
Cool. Marlee.
So again, I guess my context is a little bit different in the sense that when you're born an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, you're born politicised in this country. We cannot escape our politics, and inherently we are more politically engaged because the issues at the forefront of our national discussions impact us more. But when it comes to the barriers that stand in the way for Indigenous young people to kind of progress forward, again, they're more intense. It's not necessarily, as much as having opportunities is definitely a barrier, it's also barriers to avoiding the incarceration system, avoiding the devastating impacts of mental health and suicide, avoiding being taken from your family and ending up with the thousands of children who are still part of the ongoing stolen generation. So that becomes a lot more complex. But the beautiful thing about my culture and about my peers in my community is that because of what's been fought for so long and the strength we have in 80,000 years of history is our voices are very, very strong. We are very, very resilient, and it seems that from my perspective at least, we're on the cusp of a very big wave of change because of our young leaders.
That's a really good point, actually. I think that the next thing I want to ask is more specifically around school strikes for climate. I think that it was something that each of you had a perspective on and wanted to talk about. And so I guess I want to ask you, what do you think the school strike for climate sort of showed us around young Australians and what's important to them? And again, I will go to Aisheeya first.
I think for the longest time, not just from adults, but from the perspective of a lot of young people, was that people of my age or of my generation, we had no interest in partaking in our society in that way, in our politics, in our democracy, and we, I don't know, maybe are too consumed with technology or fleeting aspects of life. And so I think this was a very momentous change or development in the course of my generation, in that we showed Australia, we showed the world that we do care. We are capable of taking what we learn in classrooms, in science, in geography, applying that to the real world and asking of our government for something that is integral in ensuring that we do progress, that future generations do prosper. And so the school strike for climate, for me personally, and me as in every student that has partaken in it, I know has been a very uplifting movement. It's often been described as the bubbling, like melting pot of the climate movement in general. And of course, no one can deny, at least I hope no one in this room will deny, that climate change is one of the, if not the biggest threat to our world, to everyone in general. Of course, with First Nations people and young people being at the forefront of the issue. So climate change and School Strike for Climate hasn't just awakened young people's passions and care for the issue itself, but it's bled into so many different areas of advocacy and of human rights, and that's in relation to, as I mentioned, First Nations people, who are, of course, one of the most integral aspects of the discussion here in Australia, for sure. So myself, I've been so enlightened, and so much insight has been revealed to me, and I know to my peers who have also undergone the whole process of being part of School Strike for Climate. So whether it be in relation to our Indigenous people, in relation to climate refugees, and to situations overseas, etc., etc. It's a really broad area of advocacy that bleeds into other aspects, and I think that's just in this discussion of human rights, it's important, and of course, it's more than important. It's perhaps the most dooming discussion, yeah.
And I think it's something that really connects people around the world, which is huge as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it affects everyone, literally.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Marlee.
The first time I saw footage from the school climate strikes, I found myself feeling really emotional. I cried quite a bit because it was just such a beautiful thing. And I think that, you know, I won't speak as articulately as you have about the importance of climate change, so I might just talk about how important and how hopeful it makes you feel to see a massive group of young people from all different backgrounds, all different demographics, coming together and, you know, working towards something. And then there were, you know, elements and particular shots from the first rallies of kids celebrating, I think, in what they'd achieved, and doing that together and not seeing differences. And as someone who grew up in I grew up in the Sutherland Shire in Sydney, very white Anglo-Saxon, hard place to be anything other than white. And I had a lot of kids who didn't understand me and didn't understand why I spoke out about particular things and why I was passionate. And I just know for a fact that when you can unite on something like this, that is very emotional and is very, you know, on the horizon, essentially. There's so many kids who'll feel less alone and more connected and more with purpose. And I think, again, you're right in the sense that young people didn't want to engage in politics because they don't think that they have power. But now seeing the platform that's been created through School Strike for Climate, I think that it can see a lot more young people wanting to show up for other issues as well. So it's phenomenal, and I think it's a paradigm shift in our generation, and it'll see bigger action and more people doing more like this.
If I could just add on to that, I think that's an excellent point, because my experience in the first strike was just looking around and seeing the range of people there, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds, etc. Because we talk about Australia as though we're this great multicultural nation, and you know, there's such diversity and unity in the way that we live every day, but really everyone in the urban areas, speaking like, forget about the inside of Australia, on the skirts of our coastal areas, we live in pockets, and we don't see much interaction like between those pockets. So this was, I think, an excellent sort of mechanism through which young people, especially in my local context, have interacted with each other, have come together, and have created hope for a more unified future that we idealistically talk about, but really can be possible, we've now seen.
Just quickly, Frank, is there anything, would you like to say anything re the school strikes?
I think what school strikes show us is, in particular looking at it from a social media perspective, is the value that the monster that we call social media has provided to the school strikes and provided to activism in general. I think that the way that young people have utilised social media and media in general to create a platform in which we can share our own ideas free of censorship, free of editing that might come after from different areas of the media, has allowed us to create a passion amongst our peers that has obviously reverberated across the globe and has resulted in these massive gatherings of people. Without the effective use of the climate strikes, that wouldn't have been possible. No one who's involved in the climate strikes can afford to travel around the country and campaign to people about the strike. But what we can do is contact people around the country via social media and get them involved, get them enthusiastic about it, and really push the strikes to where they are now.
That was a really good segue into my next question. Thank you very much. And I will just quickly go to Marlee on social media because I know that you want to talk a bit about that. What do you think the role of social media is in sort of democracy and in activism?
Yeah, so I mean, Frank put it perfectly. Obviously, I guess part of the reason I'm up here is because I do run a social media page called Titters for Titters that's become so much more than I ever expected, and it does come down to the democracy of social media and the ability for anyone and everyone to make decisions about what's important to them and tailor their social media to that, and also use it to advocate for things. I mean, sometimes there are problems with hashtag activism or slacktivism and things like that, but if you can have stories about any particular issue, whether it is Indigenous or about climate change or about LGBTQI issues, you can have it online. You're going to find your community, you're going to find people that you can connect to and people who reciprocate what you believe in. And it just strengthens your ability to talk about it and to advocate it in your real life. Not that everyone does that, but there's still a great majority and a significant amount of people who use the online world to help build their offline actions.
Yeah, really exciting potential, I think. I'm going to go to the questions on Slido now because we've just talked about social media and this is a form of social media. So the first question that I want to ask you, what can we change in Australian schools to reshape the way that human rights is taught to young people? I might go to Frank for this.
I know when I learnt about human rights in school, we were handed a printout of the UN Child's Rights Declaration. And we were told to learn them, and that was it. We were told that these were our rights, and it would be in a test, and that we needed to know what they were. But that was all we learnt about them. We didn't know why it mattered that we had the rights. We didn't know how we got those rights. We never learnt anything more than that those were what they were and that we needed to know them. And so they never seemed important. I didn't actually know what my rights were as a child and then as a human being until I started working on Keep Talking, and I started looking into how Australia adheres to those human rights and how it does not. And so I think that is a huge downfall of where we've been educating young people about these rights, is that we don't make it seem as important as it actually is. Nobody is going to take it seriously when you hand a child a printout that has all of the rights written on it, even if it is in child-friendly form. Nobody's going to take that seriously. No one's going to actually remember those unless they actually can link it to why it matters to them in their real world.
Thank you for that. Related to that question, I guess, and I might go to Marlee, there's a question here that says, should activism in particular and how to be an activist be taught in our schools, do you think?
I don't know if that's something that you can just learn. I think that what you can do is empower young people by making sure they realise there is importance in their voice, and that comes back to listening to young people. I was talking with a friend of mine just last week about who similarly has a platform, and people listen to them as well occasionally. Another young person, and I was like, how did we become like this? Because people often ask, where did you find your voice? How did you come to a place where you feel comfortable talking like this? And she made such a perfect point in the fact that it came down to her family life, and I think it's the same as me. My parents really valued my voice at the dinner table throughout my entire childhood. They wanted my opinion on things. They offered, critique and helped me grow. And without them being very conscious of this, they treated me like not just their child, but also a fellow human being. And I think that not every child is going to have that privilege in their household. But if we can build a school environment where we're also able to show children that their voices matter and that they do have rights is really, really important. And I'm pretty sure I got the same printout, by the way.
Probably.
I think that's a really important point about the role of parents. And speaking from my own experience, I think sometimes my father posits, outrageous views at the dinner table, not because that's what he believes, but just to teach me to formulate, a counter argument, which I think is a really, intelligent thing to do, although he may regret it. A question that I had from things that I heard in the discussion this morning was about the importance of language and whether you guys think that the current language that we use around human rights and empowerment and things like that is accessible, or do we need it to be a little more, simple and plain speaking so that people can feel as though it speaks to them, if that makes sense. Marlee.
Yeah, I would agree that it needs to become more tangible for the everyday person. I think, even being invited to speak at a human rights conference was quite daunting to me, because I feel like, I'm not a human rights expert, because that's someone who works for the UN, essentially. Like, that's what it feels like. Yeah. It's not tangible enough, and it's not emphasised as something that we should be considering every day in our everyday kind of processes. I think that it is about your simple, basic rights. I think we need to bring it back down to that.
I would agree, and I was the same as you. I was like, are you sure? We do need to wrap up fairly soon. I'm watching the clock and aware that it's going red. But I wanted to ask if there were any final sort of remarks that people wanted to make very quickly. Aisheeya.
Well, I'll just quickly go over the demands we have for our government. So there's 3. First one is no new oil, coal or gas projects in Australia. Second one is 100% renewable energy and exports by 2030. And third one is a just transition for the communities and workers in the coal and oil and gas industry. So please do so soon.
Thank you. Frank.
I think something that I haven't emphasised enough coming from working in an LGBT space is the importance of teaching young people about the LGBT community in a safe way, I learnt about the community through the internet. And what I learnt through that is that people don't like LGBT people, that the LGBT community is vast, expansive and confusing, and that there was no way I could ever learn enough to actually understand it. It was scary, and it took me a long time to get over that fear. What that meant was that I was afraid of myself. And as a young person growing up, you don't want to be afraid of yourself. You want to be able to believe in what you have to say and believe in who you are. And so I think education comes down to a lot, but safely educating young people about who they are and who they can be is incredibly important.
Thank you, and I think that's a really, unless you had any very quick final comments, Marlee, but I think that's a really interesting and strong place to end on. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to all the panel for such incredibly insightful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you have too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.